Well, for more, we can cross to the COP27 and speak to our Environment Editor, Valerie Dekimpe. Valerie, today is the second day of the COP's World Leaders Summit. Tell us more about what's on the agenda.
Well, today we're going to see yet another day packed with speeches as leaders continue to take to the podium to deliver their national statements. High-level discussions will also continue with at least two roundtables scheduled on issues relating to water security and also the impact of climate change on the most vulnerable communities. Two key topics that are very important for African nations present here at COP27. And we have heard from the president of Kenya, for example, speaking about water security, describing the impacts of climate change in Africa, saying that it was a living nightmare. We know that the Horn of Africa has been suffering its worst drought in over 40 years. We have also heard from low-lying nations, for example, battling with rising sea levels. The president of Kiribati has spoken about how the country has imposed a climate emergency, as the country is facing rising sea levels, and so they have fresh water shortages because ocean waves continue to wash over their land. So we could also expect to see some commitments, some announcements perhaps on adaptation in Africa, and that is how to help countries cope with the consequences of the climate crisis. And we have seen on the margins of COP27, a report has been published showing that $2 trillion will be needed every single year by 2030 to help African countries cope with the consequences of climate breakdown.
And Valerie, leaders tend to make a lot of promises at these summits, but have any concrete advances been made so far?
Well, so far we have heard a lot of speeches, but we haven't seen a lot of action. And usually World Leaders Summits are a moment or about setting the tone for the next 2 weeks of discussions where we may or may not see concrete alliances forming between countries to help developing nations, for example, battle the consequences of climate change and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. But it's also important to note that some of the world's biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions are not present at the summit. So China, India, Australia, Canada, for example, they have all sent country delegates, but their leaders have snubbed the summit. So that is an important thing to mention as well. And we have also seen little concrete action because countries essentially don't have anything new to say. They don't have any new pledges to make. So they had been invited to revise and strengthen their climate plans before coming here to COP27. Only 29 countries have done so, and a majority of the rest, 160 countries, have simply missed the deadline. One major breakthrough to note, however, since the beginning of COP27, for the first time in the history of UN climate summits, the question of loss and damage of climate reparations has made it onto the official agenda. And this is a historic moment, especially for vulnerable nations, low-lying countries, island nations that have been raising this question of loss and damage for over 30 years. And so this is key for them, and it has been at the heart of their demands for decades. We are expecting a speech by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who has been very outspoken about loss and damage and demanding that wealthy nations actually pay up. And this, of course, coming on the heels of dramatic floods that have hit the country earlier this year. He has put this notion of loss and damage at the heart of his position here at COP27. We have seen in the Pakistani pavilion, for example, the slogan of the pavilion is "What happens in Pakistan does not stay in Pakistan," referring to the financial responsibility that rich countries bear for the climate crisis.
All right, we'll be closely watching that speech from the leader of Pakistan. Valerie, thank you so much for that update. That's France 24's Environment Editor Valerie Dekimpe reporting from the COP27 in Egypt.